Before I teach you the various mechanics of peeking, I would like to help give you some insight into the decision-making process of how to choose which peek to use in a given scenario. Peeking is a complicated topic, and just like gunfight hygiene, there's never an objectively correct approach. To explain how I personally view the underlying concept of peeking, I'm going to first plot some Valorant guns on a graph. This graph will have two axes labeled mobility and range. When a gun is further to the right on this graph, that will indicate that on average it performs better in longer range fights. The opposite is true for when a gun is further to the left on the chart. Similarly, when a gun is further up on the y-axis of the graph, this will indicate that the gun performs better while the wielder is more mobile. Guns near the bottom of the graph indicate that the gun is stronger when the user can remain more stationary. There is a third axis to this graph, but to keep it more readable, I've opted to put the value of this next to the weapon instead. The third factor at play is the cost of the weapon. When two guns have very similar strengths and weaknesses, the cost of the weapon can indicate if one is measurably stronger than another. It is important to note that this is not necessarily an indicator of strength, but it's a very good rule of thumb. With this in mind, I would like to break down the various types of peeking into two overarching categories: committed and uncommitted. When the potential fight likely favors our opponent's weapon, it is key that we use an uncommitted peek. For example, maybe our opponent is at long range with a Vandal, and we have a Stinger. We would not want to commit to a gunfight at this range, given these circumstances. Instead, we should recognize that our gun is more mobile and better in shorter range engagements, and try to find ways to close this gap. Peeking is an endless battle of the mind. Whoever makes the better decision has the upper hand. I hope these following examples will demonstrate why I cannot give you a one-size-fits-all solution. While most of peeking is reliant on our brain, you do need to know the mechanics behind a couple of the techniques we just saw. Jump peeking is an uncommitted peek which is highly useful for gathering safe information. It is performed by using an airstrafe near a dangerous corner. While you perform this airstrafe, ensure that you are looking at your minimap to see if you spotted any enemies. Refer to the previous video in this series for an in-depth guide on airstrafing. You can also perform a silent jump peek by crouching before you jump and landing while only holding your walk key. I personally don't believe this mechanic is necessary to learn until you are at the highest level. I've never used this in a competitive match myself. Lastly, it is very important to know how to silent AD peek. If you peek at full speed but keep your total distance traveled under a full footstep, your agent will not make any noise. This is an incredibly important skill to master and is the most common technique used by professionals to clear dangerous angles without making any noise. Many would not consider crosshair placement to be a topic that should be covered in a movement guide. That's fine. This is my guide. My personal opinion is that perfect crosshair placement and movement go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. Yin and yang, light and dark, winter and summer, victory and defeat. You never really notice how fluid high-level crosshair placement and movement truly is until you watch your own gameplay. Then, The seemingly insurmountable difference in skill is painfully palpable. Distraught from the existential dread of such a realization, you turn to a talking banana for advice. I oblige. The key to establishing such consistency is by setting aside your worldly desires. We must unanimously accept that training ourselves to move and aim with such grace can only come from an immense amount of focused practice. Try this. Play an entire ranked game with your crosshair trained on any corner at head level. Your crosshair should only leave its post when you may momentarily pre-aim it into a wall to then follow up with a swing. You must give so much focus into your crosshair that the games become a blur. Is today Saturday? It doesn't matter. Your crosshair dipped 4 pixels down when you looked at your minimap on round 6. You're not good enough yet. Weeks pass. Months. Curse you, talking banana! There was never a light at the end of this tunnel. Why? Oh, why did I abandon my family in the pursuit of such an impossible goal? Exhausted from your failure, you return to your previous endeavors of trying to actually win Valorant games. However, unbeknownst to you, your crosshair placement and movement are now immaculate. All that blood, sweat, and tears have paid off. You are a master of movement.